Welcome to episode 5 of Dad by Daylight, the Passive Labor Party. In this episode, we will be discussing Malin's induction right up until active labor. Now, there's a ton to go over in this episode, so I'm just going to have Episode Joe take it away. Thanks, Introduction Me. You're right, this is a lot to go over, so let's get right to it. The story of Malin's labor begins with a doctor's appointment about 2 weeks before the baby's due date. We were told that because of the size of the baby and Malin's gestational diabetes, Malin would have to be induced about 10 days early. So at noon on March the 4th, we go to the doctor's to get a Foley catheter inserted. Now, a Foley catheter is essentially like a little balloon that is inserted just past the cervix. The balloon is then filled with a saline solution and it inflates roughly to the size of a small clementine. Now, this is sort of meant to mimic the pressure of a baby's head against the cervix, which is to try to start the process of labor more naturally. Once that's inserted, we were sent home with the Foley catheter still in, told that contractions would probably start in the next couple of hours, but to not return to the hospital until noon the next day unless the contractions were less than 3 minutes apart or the Foley catheter falls out, meaning that Malin's cervix will have dilated enough so that we can start thinking about active labor at the hospital. So we head on home, and it pretty much sucks for Madeline. Contractions start for the next couple of hours, but are spaced about 20 minutes apart. Now, to clear up any confusion, a contraction is a tightening of the uterine muscles and essentially feels like just doing a crunch as hard and as you can and then relaxing. It can be extremely painful and it will vary in intensity from very bad to not so bad. So we do some walking around, we do some stretches to try to help to move the labor along, but nothing really seems to be helping too much. We're just sort of having the 20-minute space apart contractions, and that's about it. So the day goes on. Malin eats a little bit that night and gets 5 or 6 hours of pretty horrendous sleep, and then wakes up, and we start to get ready to go to the hospital to start, having the baby. So Malin wakes up. We both wake up. Malin eats about a quarter of a piece of toast, which will come into play as the day goes on. And around 9:50 decides, okay, I'm going to shower up before we head over to the hospital. After less than maybe 10 minutes in the shower, Malin begins having contractions that almost knock her off her feet. They're incredibly powerful, and she just immediately needs me to help her. So I go in to help her. I help her get out of the shower. I help her dry off. I get dressed, and we're going to walk over. We're walking to the car. We're heading over. It's going to be a little early, but we think that's fine. The contractions are still pretty spaced out at about 10 minutes, but they're so strong that we just need to go. We have already packed our pregnancy bag, which includes comfortable socks, comfortable robe, pillows, long phone charging cables, some light diabetes-approved snacks, just a couple things to make our stay a little bit more comfortable. So that's already in the car, so I just have to take Malin into the car, help Malin into the car, and we'll be on our way. Now, as I'm walking her out to the car, I notice a note on my car. So I drop off Malin, I go over to see the note, and I see, sorry, please call me, and a phone number. And I look on my driver's side door, and my car door is quite smashed in. So overnight, at some point, someone had just backed into my car, which was a pretty shocking thing to see as I'm heading out the door to bring Malin to the hospital. I just put the pocket in my note and I say, I'll deal with this later. This is not a priority. It's whatever. We got to get going. So, off we are. We're off to the races. The drive to the hospital takes about 30 minutes. Malin has to grab my arm in pain a few times, but otherwise it's pretty uneventful. So we get straight to the hospital. I park in the 20-minute loading zone. Now, this is only sort of important in the sense that we've toured the hospital, we've taken classes at the hospital, and they repeatedly tell you, do not park longer than 20 minutes in the 20-minute loading zone. You will get ticketed, you will get towed. This is sort of ominous because I know I'm going to park in the zone and I start my timer, but I'm like, if I have to be in the hospital longer than 20 minutes, I'm not, to help get things set up, I'm not coming back out. If I get a ticket or if I get a towed, whatever. Well, again, another thing I'll just have to deal with if that so happens, but hopefully that won't be a problem. So we get in, the nurses and everyone take us in really quite quickly. The room is already set up because they knew we were coming. You know, it's 11 o'clock now. We were supposed to be there at noon anyway, so we're just a little early. So everything's set up and we get right in. The first things they do to get Madeline set up are set an IV and set up a couple sensors around her stomach, little sensor bands around her stomach. Now these are pretty interesting because they will measure the strength and duration of each contraction so that can be tracked, as well as her and the baby's heart rate during this whole ordeal. Now, these is really, really interesting to me because it's just really crazy to actually watch, Madeline's heart rate, the contractions happen, and her heart rate change, and then the baby's heart rate during the whole ordeal, the whole thing. And even during strong contractions, this goes through the whole process. The baby seems almost completely unbothered by it, just a constant, steady beat, and it's really interesting and cool to see, I must say. After we get Madeline set up and ready to go, we fill out our official labor plan. Now, we've already talked to the labor team, and we already have discussed our labor plan, but they need everything officially in writing at this point, just to say, if anything goes away wrong, they can just refer to the labor plan, and they know everything that we want. So generally what it's asking is a couple things. First, we note that we have no doula, nor do we want a doula. Now, doula is sort of a non-medical professional that, a lot of people work with throughout the pregnancy process to help during labor. And they help a lot with the physical, mental, and emotional toll that the labor process can take. And they're really effective for a lot of different people through this whole process. But that really wasn't Madeline's style. We didn't work with a doula at all, and we just really had no interest in it. So that was one of the first things we noted on the thing was no doula. We chose to donate the umbilical cord blood that we would get after the baby was born. Now, this is sort of a special, highly oxygenated blood that is used for treating a lot of different illnesses, especially in other children that are born, such as leukemia or immune disorders. So it's rare, it's highly sought after, and we knew that for everything we had seen so far, our baby was going to just be happy and healthy. So donating this blood can really help other newborns, and we really wanted to make sure we did that. And now, one of the biggest questions is, what do we want for pain management? And we had already discussed that sort of anything was on the table. The biggest choices that you sort of have are nothing. You just sort of raw dog it and do it as is. You can take sort of like nitrous and sort of breathe that throughout the process to sort of take the edge off of all the pain. You can get sort of a general morphine drip that is sort of just how you do a lot of pain management after in the hospital. That's normal. Or you could do an epidural, which is essentially a needle directly into Madeline's spinal column that would put fentanyl directly into the spinal column, causing her to essentially be numb from the chest down. Now, all this pain management it's a little odd to me that there is a ton of judgment in this pain management because people really have opinions on how you should deal with your pain. We didn't really let that, what other people said bother us too much, but we did talk with other parents and other doctors. And in the end, we were pretty set that when the pain got bad, Madeline would try to tough it out as best she could. But in the end, she was probably going to get an epidural. And really early, as one of the nurses noted, you do not win any prizes for being the toughest during the labor process. The prize is having a happy, healthy child, and you need to just do what you need to do to get to that point. And so for us, all the pain management options were on the table, and we're very happy with our choices here. Now, all this took about an hour to set up. And when we finally had a bit of a lull in the flurry of activity, I decided, well, I have to move the car and grab the pregnancy bag. So I run out. Luckily, the car wasn't even towed or ticketed, so it must have just been a lot of bluster to make sure there wasn't a lot of people in this kind of limited parking spot. I move the car over to the roof of the garage, and I head back in with everything. Now, upon entering back into the room, I'm a little shocked to see Madeline sitting up, being held up by two nurses, and what looks to be about a foot-long needle going right into her spine. I knew an epidural was possible, but I had never seen one. And I didn't understand what was happening. So I was a little shocked to see, like, what is everything okay? What's happening here? It turns out that pretty much after I left, the anesthesiologist had just walked by our room, and the nurse asked Madeline, like, "Hey, I could go get you an epidural right now. I know that you're in a ton of pain, and we can grab and just get the epidural going right away." And Madeline was like, "Yes, let's just do it." So while I was out, I moved the car, came back, epidural was put in, and the pain relief was pretty immediate. Madeline has a pretty bad sciatica and a bad slip disc, and all this pain and of the contractions was all just compounding and causing so much pain that as soon as the epidural was set, Madeline felt so much better. It did come with a few drawbacks, however. The first, as Madeline described it, is she was numb from the tits down. And so that made things like moving around the bed very difficult. So she was sort of, whenever she needed to adjust, myself or a nurse would have to help her a bit. Second, she was no longer allowed to eat solid food, since there is some evidence that an epidural can increase the likelihood of needing a cesarean, aka surgical intervention, to remove the baby. So, because surgery was now a slightly higher likelihood on the table, she could no longer eat solid food. So that's where we are. And so now this is around 2 p.m. on March 5th, and we're all set up. So for the next several hours, it's pretty boring. We're just sort of hanging out, chit-chatting. A bunch of different nurses and a couple different midwives come in and we discuss. They're all great. They're all very helpful. But, there's not really too much going on. Throughout this time, keep in mind I had mentioned earlier that Madeline had only eaten a quarter piece of toast that morning. Now all she could have was liquids until the baby was born, and she was starting to get really hungry, but there were extremely limited food options. And she had already been feeling a little bit nauseous through this whole process. Her whole pregnancy she had been nauseous. So finding anything that she would be, easily keep down and feel good eating was difficult. In fact, we really didn't find much. So first option they offered was some kind of broth, veggie, chicken, or beef. And Madeline was like, "Okay, I'll have some veggie broth." Well, they were out of veggie, and they were also out of chicken. So all they had was beef broth. So they gave her a bit of beef broth. Unfortunately, it was sort of beef broth cubes that we didn't really realize were not fully dissolved. So initially, Madeline had the, I would say, joy of crunching down some broth at around 4 p.m., which kind of put her off food because it's pretty nasty, not very good, not fun to eat. Around 7, a nurse said, "Oh, you could probably have Jello. That would be okay." But again, Madeline has gestational diabetes, so all she can have is sugar-free Jello. And they can't find any sugar-free Jello. So after about an hour, so now we're approaching 8, again, having barely eaten all day, they find a cup of sugar-free lemon Jello that was in the liver ward that's sort of down at the other end of the hospital. But this was a warm cup of lemon Jello. They also couldn't find any spoons, so they gave Madeline a fork. So Madeline then proceeded to sit up as best she could. I kind of helped her sit up a little bit. Dug in with her fork, that of warm, kind of wet Jello, and begins to catapult shards of this warm Jello into her mouth as best she can. I'm sort of sitting, looking aside in amazement. Neither of us thought like, "Oh, why don't you just help feed me?" No, she's just sort of catapulting the Jello for. I'm just looked on stunned, like, what is happening? This is insane to me. And this goes on for about half the cup of Jello. At which point she's like, "This is disgusting. I can't eat this." And that was pretty much it for the food that she'll have up until the birth. So she's really getting hungry, but that's the best we can do for food. Looking back on this and talking about it more and more, Like, I am so impressed by how she dealt with all of this. Like, if this were me, you would not. The complaining would be ceaseless. It would be unbearable for me to be around me doing this. And Madeline was perfectly pleasant. She, was in a lot of pain, but was, took it with much grace. And I just, I know I've said it a couple times, but big props to her. She's extremely tough, and she really, really took this amazingly. What did I do during this time? Well, we've talked in the past about how all of pregnancy, the best thing you can do is to try to be useful. And this was another time that it was difficult to find ways to be directly useful, but you could definitely find things to do that would really help Madeline through this process. Sometimes a nurse would ask me to help move a limb or help rotate her because of the epidural, and I would just make sure I was there and it would help the best I can. Other than those direct ways, things I would do would just be like talk to Madeline in a normal way, try to take her mind off of, the pain she was in. Listen to her as a sounding board for any complaints that she had. Cheerlead her about how amazing she was doing and how I would be way, way, way more insufferable than she's even close to being during this time. I would rub her back and her shoulders to let her know I was there and to distract her from the pain as best I could. I would fetch the nurses if she needed anything or talk to them to make sure things were going the way Madeline wanted them to go. I would also periodically text and send pictures to her family and friends to know that things were going well and make sure everyone was being communicated with that Madeline wanted to know. Just being there and doing what I could and just being always available to whatever she needed. Sometimes the best ability is availability. So finally, we're getting to 8 a.m. on March the 6th. I slept through the night, maybe 4 hours of pretty rough sleep, and Madeline got almost none at all. I'm pretty tired. She's completely exhausted. And our final nurse, Holly, enters the picture, and we're in the final stretch now. So I hope this build up to the active labor with all of this passive labor was informative for you. Next episode, I'll go over Madeline's active labor and the birth of our child. Really looking forward to telling you about the moment I finally officially became a dad. Until then, let's all be good to each other, and I'll see you then. Bye bye.